Mistress convinced Millionaire to sign divorce papers, his reaction after seeing his ex's baby. Shocking. A warm breeze rolled through the opulent foyer, unsettling the lavish floral arrangements as hushed whispers filled the air. In a world where money buys nearly everything from designer, wardrobes to the silence of family, secrets one man's heartache threatened to unravel the perfect facade. Richard Davenport, a celebrated millionaire known for his boundless generosity and extravagant lifestyle, stood at the center of a storm he never saw coming. Betrayal, passion, and unspoken truths merged into a swirling tempest around him. Before this saga ended, lives would be upended. When Richard finally discovered the real price of his choices, the aftermath was truly explosive. Richard Davenport was born into a life of privilege in Fairfield County, Connecticut, a place often whispered about for its sprawling estates and manicured lawns that seemed to exist outside the realm of ordinary people. He was the heir to the Davenport real estate fortune, a dynasty that had flourished under the watchful eye of his father, Harrison Davenport, and grandfather, Stuart Davenport, for nearly 80 years. Yet from an early age, Richard's greatest longing wasn't for the sparkle of wealth or the comfort of renown. It was for genuine affection, for the kind of love money could never buy. His father, Harrison, was notoriously aloof. Work consumed his every waking moment, leaving Richard in the care of nannies and tutors who never truly replaced a parent's warmth. Richard's mother, Eva Davenport, had died when he was only 8, a tragic car accident cutting her life short. Grief had turned Harrison even more distant, and so Richard spent his formative years wandering the grand halls of Davenport Manor, forging his understanding of relationships from dusty portraits and hollow echoes. By the time Richard attended college at Brown University, he was charismatic, intelligent, and generous to a fault, but beneath his handsome exterior and impeccable manners lay a raw vulnerability. Eager to escape the lonely childhood that haunted him, he threw himself into social circles, charity events, and philanthropic endeavors. Everyone admired his altruistic streak. Women, especially, found his quiet reserve and boyish smile irresistible. He dated his share, never quite settling, until he met Sarah Miller. Sarah came from a comfortable background in upstate New York, nothing like the vast Davenport empire. But she had her own taste of success as an interior designer with a flair for minimalist sophistication. She and Richard fell into an easy rapport. Her grounded nature and ability to see beyond his fortune endeared her to him immediately. Within a year, they were engaged. The wedding was lavish but tasteful, a nod to tradition more than opulence. Everyone said they were the perfect couple, the charming heir and the brilliant designer, building a life that seemed destined for happiness. But fate, as it so often does, intervened. By their 5th wedding anniversary, cracks began to show. Richard's father passed away, leaving him solely in charge of Davenport real estate. Corporate board meetings, constant travel, and the unrelenting pressure of steering an empire engulfed Richard's life. Sarah tried to be patient, but she felt increasingly like a decorative piece in an empty mansion adorned, polished, but overlooked. While Richard labored to maintain the Davenport name and legacy, Sarah quietly yearned for companionship and emotional support. That was when Rebecca Caldwell entered the picture. With her striking red hair, sharp wit, and the kind of self-assured stride that commanded attention, Rebecca made quite an impression at a real estate conference in Manhattan. She was there representing a high-end development firm from Los Angeles looking to partner with Davenport Real Estate. Confident and ambitious, she zeroed in on Richard during a networking cocktail hour. He was more reserved, elegantly leaning against the bar, sipping a neat whiskey and scanning the crowd as though searching for something to anchor him in the swirl of business deals and meaningless small talk. Rebecca approached with calculated cool, She asked questions about the family business, but her stare was anything but professional. Richard, flattered by her blatant interest, found himself relaxing in her presence. For the first time in months, he felt as though someone was focusing on him alone, his opinions, his jokes, his vulnerabilities. Their easy banter spiraled into after-hours drinks, then private dinners, each interaction growing more intimate and charged with a lingering tension. Richard tried desperately to ignore, despite the guilt that gnawed at him, especially each time he returned to Sarah's gentle embraces. Richard rationalized his growing closeness with Rebecca as an outlet for the stress that threatened to crush him. She was a bright spark in a life overshadowed by relentless responsibilities. Eventually, a business trip to Miami pushed them over the edge. Late one night, fueled by champagne and moonlight dancing, he fell into her arms, crossing a boundary he once believed was sacred. The affair escalated with alarming speed, made easier by Rebecca's strategic intellect. She understood how to shield their rendezvous from prying eyes, ensuring that Richard never had to fully confront the enormity of what he was doing. Weeks bled into months, and the guilt he felt became a constant ache, making him withdrawn around Sarah. She sensed something was amiss. She was no fool, yet she clung to the hope that this was just a phase, a rocky patch in a marriage tested by corporate upheavals and personal strain. When Sarah finally discovered the nature of Richard's betrayal, it wasn't from an accidental phone call or a lipstick-stained collar, typical clichés she would have expected from a tabloid story. Instead, the truth arrived in the form of a text message from an unfamiliar number. "If you want to see your husband's secrets, meet me at the Huntley Hotel, room 714.8 p.m. tonight." That was all it said. Her heart pounded as she debated, was this a cruel prank against her better judgment? Sarah went. The hallway leading to room 714 felt impossibly long. She knocked. A woman with short blonde hair, wearing a business suit, let her in. "My name is Emily DeLong," the woman introduced herself softly. "I have some information about Rebecca Caldwell and your husband." Emily had once worked under Rebecca at the development firm, but their professional relationship had ended bitterly. Emily possessed proof receipts of clandestine hotel stays, personal emails, pictures, all meticulously compiled like evidence in a courtroom trial. Sarah left the hotel nearly in shock, her entire world trembling at the edges. Yet Sarah didn't lash out at once. She withdrew into herself, quietly consulting her longtime friend, Bethany Lewis, a family lawyer in New Haven. Torn between heartbreak and lingering love, she resolved to confront Richard calmly. His immediate reaction was surprise, then anger, then remorse. He promised it had been a lapse in judgment, nothing more. He begged Sarah to see the mistake for what it was, a tragic, one-time breach of trust. Sarah, though deeply wounded, still loved him, if only she could believe him. Rebecca, however, was not content to be a passing fling. She reveled in the power she held over Richard, pushing him ever closer to severing ties with Sarah. Pressures from every angle weighed on him. Meanwhile, the business thrived under his leadership, fueling the illusion that his life was still under control. No one outside their closest circle knew the storm raging within his marriage. The public continued to admire the philanthropic poster child that was Richard Davenport. And so, at a fragile dinner one evening, Sarah tried to salvage the tattered remnants of their relationship. She laid out her conditions: therapy, honesty, a renewed commitment. Richard wanted to agree, but all he could picture was Rebecca's face, so different from Sarah's gentle features. He was addicted to Rebecca's reckless unpredictability, the thrill that came from stepping outside the gilded cage of his life. In that moment of cowardice, he broke Sarah's heart again by giving her uncertainty instead of unambiguous devotion. Little did he know that Rebecca was already spinning a new web a plan so audacious it would shake the very foundation of their world. If she couldn't claim Richard Davenport outright, she would find a way to force his hand and rewrite everyone's fates. Rebecca Caldwell was no ordinary mistress content to exist in the shadows. She had grown up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Pittsburgh, determined from a young age to rise above what she called the confines of ordinary life. She discovered early on that ambition alone wasn't enough. She needed the right leverage, people to manipulate, situations to exploit, and secrets to unveil. In Richard Davenport, she saw the perfect combination: power, wealth, and an emotional vulnerability that made him malleable. As their affair deepened, Rebecca learned to read the subtle lines of worry on Richard's face, sensing when business troubles weighed on him and when guilt about Sarah flickered in his eyes. She played the part of the understanding confidant, the supportive ally who helped him escape the burdens of an inherited empire. With each whispered confession he shared in her arms, she felt her influence grow. But the more she gleaned of his massive fortune, the more she craved it. She began hinting at bigger dreams: a sprawling oceanfront villa, lavish parties, philanthropic ventures that could rival his own. Richard listened with cautious fascination, torn between the allure of a new life and the duty that beckoned him home to Sarah. Whenever he hesitated, Rebecca skillfully stirred his fears, implying that Sarah would never truly forgive him, that their marriage was already fractured beyond repair. In her eyes, the only logical next step was divorce. Yet Richard balked at such a final measure. For all his faults, the idea of simply discarding Sarah felt too cruel, too final. He might have betrayed her, but his love for her had not vanished overnight. There was history, comfort, a sense of loyalty, even if that loyalty had been stretched thin. Rebecca saw the conflict in him and decided to escalate her campaign. It started with small acts of sabotage. She would send him messages late at night, knowing he was with Sarah, forcing him to hide his phone in a panic. She arranged for accidental run-ins at events, humiliating Sarah in the process. At charity galas, Rebecca would linger just enough on the sidelines to unsettle Sarah, letting her know that the affair was far from over. Even if it meant tarnishing her own image in exclusive social circles, Rebecca believed the reward, marrying Richard and securing her place in high society, outweighed the temporary scorn. Eventually, tension in the Davenport household reached a fever pitch. Sarah packed a suitcase and moved into a suite at the luxurious Chatsfield Hotel in downtown Manhattan, a discreet location where the press was unlikely to follow. From that vantage point, she consulted with Bethany Lewis about possible divorce proceedings. Bethany, noting Sarah's emotional turmoil, reminded her that if divorce was the final step, they needed to move fast. A prenuptial agreement had been signed, one that heavily favored Richard, thanks to Harrison Davenport's protective instincts. Sarah, feeling cornered, began to wonder if she should proceed. On one hand, she could salvage her dignity and independence, albeit with limited financial security. On the other, she feared losing a man she had genuinely loved. But the more she grappled with her decision, the more she realized that the man she once married might no longer exist. Little did any of them realize, Rebecca was already in contact with Mark Henderson, a discreet yet ruthless family attorney known for representing wealthy clients in high-stakes divorces. She arranged clandestine meetings in dimly lit restaurant corners, discussing strategies to ensure that if Richard ever did leave Sarah, Rebecca would stand to benefit immensely, perhaps not directly, but by positioning herself to become a more significant part of his life and finances once Sarah was out of the picture. Then came the night Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The test results in her hand confirmed a suspicion that had been gnawing at her for weeks. Her heart pounded with excitement, her mind whirring with possibilities. A baby, Richard's baby, would upend everything. It gave her a trump card, a tangible claim to his future. She didn't tell him immediately. Instead, she waited, letting the secret empower her as she plotted her next move. When she finally revealed her pregnancy to Richard, during a getaway weekend in the Hamptons, he felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. They were standing on a private stretch of beach, a crisp wind tangling in Rebecca's hair. She broke the news with trembling lips, as if she were both ecstatic and terrified. In reality, her nerves were more about perfecting the delivery than truly worrying about his reaction. Richard's response was a strangled mix of awe, fear, and guilt. A child? He had never even talked to Sarah about starting a family, not seriously. The gravity of the situation weighed on him. He envisioned the scandal, if word got out that he was fathering a child with his mistress while still legally married to another woman. For a moment, he even questioned if the child could be someone else's, but one look at Rebecca's fierce gaze dispelled that thought. In the following days, his mind raced. If he told Sarah about the pregnancy, it would all be over. Perhaps she'd file for divorce on the spot, or worse, go public with the details. Davenport Real Estate's reputation would take a hit. His philanthropic endeavors would be overshadowed by personal scandal. Donors, board members, and the press would swarm like sharks smelling blood in the water. Rebecca, sensing his turmoil, pressed him to do the honorable thing. Marry her, build a new life, and stop clinging to a marriage that was already frayed. She spoke of their future child, painting a rosy picture of family bliss, yet underneath her sentimental overtures, there was the cold calculation that if she carried his heir, her position in his life was virtually unassailable. Richard's nights became sleepless, haunted by visions of his mother's funeral and the quiet vow he had made at her graveside to do better for his own family one day. Now he saw himself on the verge of making the same destructive mistakes his father had: emotional neglect, lack of moral clarity, and a near-complete inability to handle domestic conflict. At one point, in a late-night call with his best friend, Michael Harrington, a confidant from his college days, Richard tearfully admitted he felt trapped. Michael's stern reply still echoed in his ear. "You created this mess, Rich. Only you can fix it. But do it ethically. Don't let your father's legacy define your life. Make your own choices and stand by them." Yet the solution was anything but simple. The entire puzzle hinged on whether Sarah would quietly fade away or fight back with every legal tool at her disposal. For her part, Sarah oscillated between heartbreak and anger, struggling to decide if she should maintain her dignity by forging a new path alone, or attempt once more to salvage a marriage that was disintegrating faster than she could piece it together. While all this turbulence churned behind closed doors, the public still saw Richard Davenport as the polished philanthropist, raising funds for children's hospitals, attending black-tie galas with a stoic face and forced smile. Rebecca played the role of business associate, always at his side, never crossing a line in public. Sarah vanished from the social scene, her absence explained away as an extended visit to a relative in Europe. But secrets this colossal could not remain hidden forever. Bit by bit, the illusion frayed. Suspicious glances at gatherings, hushed rumors in corporate hallways, overshadowed business deals. It was only a matter of time before everything would burst into the open. And as that moment approached, Rebecca saw an opportunity to consolidate her position once and for all. Sarah Davenport woke in her plush hotel bed at the Chatsfield one late autumn morning to find the sun slicing through a crack in the thick curtains. She felt a surge of nausea, assuming it was the anxiety that plagued her since learning of Richard's ongoing affair. But this morning, it was different, stronger, more physical. Alarmed, she rushed to the bathroom, retching into the porcelain bowl until her stomach was empty. She leaned against the cool tile, head spinning. That same day, determined to clear her thoughts, she visited Dr. Teresa Callahan, her longtime physician. After listening to Sarah's symptoms, the doctor suggested a routine blood test. Sarah thought nothing of it, certain the cause was stress, heartbreak, or a mix of the two. To her astonishment, the results confirmed that she, too, was pregnant. She left the doctor's office in a daze. Sarah had always imagined having children with Richard. She had hoped it would be a joyous occasion that drew them closer. Instead, she found herself alone, living out of a hotel suite, uncertain whether her husband was capable of redemption. Part of her contemplated not telling him at all, but she couldn't bring herself to make such a life-altering decision without giving him a chance to respond. Meanwhile, at Davenport Real Estate's main office, turmoil brewed. Subtle cracks in the company's public image emerged. A highly respected board member, Nancy Waverley, resigned under mysterious circumstances. Commercial real estate deals that had seemed certain began stalling. People whispered about a power struggle behind the scenes. Some said it involved the newly minted Mistress, Rebecca Caldwell. Others blamed Richard's distraction on the personal scandal that was rumored but not yet public. Rebecca herself, armed with her pregnancy news, contacted Mark Henderson once more, urging him to push forward. "He needs to divorce Sarah and secure a future for me and our baby," she insisted. Mark was more pragmatic, reminding her that if Richard signed away too much in a divorce, it could impair his ability to support her and the child. "We need to be strategic," Mark said, voice measured. "Richard can't be forced into a corner so tightly that he ends up resenting you." But Rebecca's patience had run thin. She wanted action, and she wanted it now. She reached out to Richard, pressuring him to file for divorce. Late at night, at his penthouse overlooking Central Park, she confronted him with pictures of her ultrasound. "Our child deserves better than a father who lives a double life. I won't be humiliated, Richard. Either you end things with Sarah, or I'll make sure the world finds out what you've done." Richard felt suffocated, trapped between the life he'd built with Sarah and this unexpected claim on his future. In a moment of desperation, he reached out to Sarah by phone. She answered quietly, her voice brittle. He stammered through an apology, sharing that Rebecca was pregnant and that he was confused, uncertain how to proceed. He did not expect Sarah's reply. "I'm pregnant too," she said, her tone even. There was a long silence as Richard struggled to absorb the words. Then she hung up, leaving him alone with his spinning mind and guilt-laden heart. In the aftermath, Richard locked himself in his study, ignoring calls, texts, and the swirl of corporate demands. Days went by before he emerged to meet Sarah in person. They chose a discreet cafe in Midtown, far from paparazzi and prying eyes. Sarah arrived first, her face pale but resolute. Richard slid into the chair opposite her, his normally confident posture sagging under the weight of his confession. "I don't know how to fix this," he said, voice cracking. "I can't believe I let us get here." Sarah pressed her trembling hands together. "You betrayed me, lied to me, and now you have Rebecca, pregnant with your child. And yet here I am, pregnant too." Her eyes shimmered with hurt. "Whatever this means for us, the truth is I didn't choose this chaos, Richard. You did." They spoke for 2 hours, unraveling layers of resentment, regret, and lingering affection. She told him that she had hired Bethany Lewis to handle her side of the potential divorce. He admitted Rebecca was pressing for him to leave Sarah and start a new life. The cafe grew crowded around them, bustling with lunch patrons, but they remained locked in conversation, each searching for a glimmer of hope. When they finally parted, neither felt any clarity. Richard considered the notion of reconciling with Sarah, who had been by his side for years, but he also felt responsible for the life growing inside Rebecca. Sarah, for her part, wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him, but the idea of raising a child in the fractured environment of a messy divorce weighed heavily on her conscience. Unbeknownst to them, Rebecca had hired a private investigator to keep tabs on Sarah. Through phone records and discreet surveillance, the investigator discovered the nature of Sarah's pregnancy. When Rebecca learned that Sarah was also expecting, her fury was boundless. She saw her advantage, her hold on Richard, threatened by this new revelation. In a bold move, Rebecca arranged a meeting with Sarah. Under normal circumstances, Sarah would have refused, but curiosity and the desire to protect her unborn child compelled her to show up. They met in the lounge of a chic hotel, the air thick with unspoken animosity. Rebecca wasted no time. "I heard you're pregnant," she began, her tone oddly calm. "I'm not here to fight with you, Sarah. I want you to step aside. Let Richard and me raise our child in peace. He may feel guilty about you, but you know where his passion lies." Sarah maintained a composed exterior, though her heart hammered in her chest. "You think this is about passion? It's about loyalty, marriage vows, a history you can't pretend doesn't exist." Rebecca gave a bitter laugh. "History, that's all you are now, a story in Richard's past. Once he signs those divorce papers, I'll make sure everything is quick and clean. You can keep your dignity. Take a settlement, walk away, and let him move on." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She had half a mind to throw her glass of water in Rebecca's face. But she steadied herself. "Your arrogance is astounding. You talk about love, but all I see is ambition. You might have tricked him into fathering a child, but that doesn't erase what he and I have shared, or what he might still feel." Rebecca refused to let her calm facade break. "Suit yourself, but know this. If you drag him through a lengthy, ugly divorce, everything you both value will be destroyed. The media will feast on this scandal. Your child will grow up hearing about how its parents were torn apart by a mistress. Is that really what you want?" The severity of Rebecca's threat felt like a knife at Sarah's throat. She realized that nothing was off limits for this woman, that even an unborn child was fair game in her quest for control. Sarah rose, leaving the lounge before she said or did something she would regret. She felt nauseated again, not by pregnancy hormones, but by the mounting terror that her world could crumble even further. Meanwhile, Richard's corporate responsibilities became impossible to ignore. Davenport Real Estate was on the brink of signing a landmark deal for a mixed-use development in Chicago, an endeavor that would put the company on the global map. If any scandal disrupted the negotiations, the financial fallout could be devastating. Investors already hinted at concerns about Richard's personal distractions. Caught in this intensifying whirlwind, Richard knew he had to act. And so, after weeks of agonizing indecision, he told Sarah he would file for divorce. Not because he no longer cared for her, but because he couldn't see a path that reconciled his duty to both unborn children. He believed that by ending the marriage, he would spare Sarah the humiliation of his public scandal and allow her some measure of peace. But the conversation took an unexpected turn. Sarah, bracing herself for the worst, managed to maintain composure. She nodded slowly, tears threatening to escape her eyes. "If that's what you want," she whispered, "I'll sign." But inside, she felt a new resolve crystallizing, a quiet, determined belief that sometimes letting go was the only way to reclaim one's self-worth. In that moment, Richard thought he saw relief in her expression, as if she too had been held captive by a marriage that was already a ghost of what it once was. Perhaps ending it would bring them both a semblance of freedom. Little did he know that the final pages of their story had not yet been written, and the next chapter would reveal a revelation so devastating it would shake him to his core. The divorce papers arrived at Sarah's hotel suite in a manila envelope, hand-delivered by a courier from Henderson and Associates. She let the documents rest, unopened, on the cherrywood coffee table for over an hour, staring at them as if they were an alien artifact. There was a pang in her chest each time she recalled the early years of her marriage, the nights spent dreaming of building a family, the laughter that once rang in rooms that now seemed permanently silent. Finally, she broke the seal. The terms were direct and, in some parts, almost generous, likely an attempt by Richard to quiet his conscience. He offered Sarah a reasonable financial settlement and the option to keep the Westport Beach House, a smaller property that had been in the Davenport portfolio for decades. Bethany Lewis urged her to fight for more, but Sarah, exhausted by the emotional battlefield, chose to keep the process as swift as possible. She agreed to sign but asked for one modification, a confidentiality clause that barred either party from publicly discussing the affair. She wanted to spare her unborn child the glare of scandal. Word of the impending divorce seeped through the upper echelons of Manhattan's elite. Whispers followed Richard at charity events. Rebecca received pointed stares from society wives who recognized her as the rumored paramour. Yet no official statement was issued, and for the most part, the tabloids remained in the dark. Big money and careful planning kept the details well contained, at least for now. On a crisp winter evening, Sarah arrived at Henderson and Associates for what was supposed to be a perfunctory meeting to finalize the paperwork. Mark Henderson greeted her with a slick smile. "Miss Miller, pardon me, Miss Davenport, Richard and Rebecca are running late. Please have a seat." The mention of Rebecca's name caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't realized the mistress would be present. Her heart raced, but she steeled herself. She was here to sign, to end this chapter of her life, and to walk away with her dignity intact. She sat in the plush waiting area, avoiding eye contact with Henderson's receptionist, who was undoubtedly privy to the entire scandal. Rebecca arrived first, exuding confidence in a fitted navy dress that showcased a small baby bump. She looked every bit the conquering queen, head held high, lips curved in a triumphant smirk. Sarah bristled but said nothing. Moments later, Richard stepped in, appearing haggard, his expression somber. They all convened in a large conference room. Papers were laid out, a notary present. Silence dominated the atmosphere until Mark Henderson began detailing the final conditions. Richard's voice was subdued as he repeated his apologies to Sarah, though he avoided her eyes. Meanwhile, Rebecca tapped her manicured nails on the polished table, impatiently waiting for it all to conclude. "Before we sign," Sarah said quietly, interrupting the scripted formality, "I want one assurance." She glanced at Richard. "No matter what happens in the future, if your child with Rebecca ever meets ours, I want them to know they're siblings. They deserve that, no matter our personal failings." Richard looked up, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing his face. "I promise," he said, voice cracking. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but she bit her tongue. The notary slid the documents across the table. With a trembling hand, Sarah signed each page. Richard followed suit, the pen feeling impossibly heavy in his grip. By the time Rebecca added her own signature as a witness, Sarah felt as if an invisible cord that had bound her for years snapped. The meeting ended unceremoniously, with Henderson and Rebecca stepping out first. Richard paused, turning to Sarah with pleading eyes. "I never meant to hurt you like this. I truly am sorry." She nodded, tears brimming. "I know, but sorry doesn't fix what's broken." They parted ways, unaware that this moment of finality was not the true end, because in the coming weeks, a sudden piece of information would surface, one that changed the entire narrative. 2 months into her pregnancy, Sarah experienced complications. Concerned about the baby's health, she moved back to the old family estate in Fairfield County, which Richard had vacated but never sold. The place was quiet and comfortable, a far cry from her sterile hotel room. One afternoon, as she unpacked some of her belongings, a dusty stack of letters fell from a desk drawer. They were old correspondences, mostly condolences sent to Richard after his father's passing. Among them was a sealed envelope with no return address, marked "Personal for Richard Davenport's eyes only." Sarah hesitated, knowing full well she shouldn't pry, but her curiosity got the best of her. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside, she found several folded pages, one of which was a paternity test, result from decades ago. The name Richard Davenport was typed at the top, indicating he had been tested as a child. Another name, wholly unexpected, leapt off the page: Harrison Davenport for the father, and Leona Caldwell for the mother. Sarah blinked, reading and rereading. The test concluded that Richard was indeed the biological son of Harrison and Leona, with over 99% certainty. But who was Leona Caldwell? She had never heard Richard mention that name. Eva Davenport was the only mother he'd ever spoken of. A chill coursed through Sarah. Caldwell. The same last name as Rebecca. Could it be a coincidence? She carefully read a note attached to the lab results. Harrison, you promised to provide for me and our son. I kept my distance all these years, but if you don't hold up your end of the deal, I'll have no choice but to reveal what we did. Don't force me to do that, Leona Caldwell. Sarah's hands trembled. If this document was authentic, it implied Richard's mother was not Eva, but someone named Leona Caldwell. Perhaps Eva had raised him as her own, or the entire affair had been hidden. Questions collided in her mind. She knew the Davenport family had money and connections to cover up all manner of scandals. But how could such a massive secret remain buried for so long? Moreover, how was Rebecca related to Leona Caldwell? If they shared the same last name, could she be a niece, a cousin, or even Leona's daughter? If so, that would make Rebecca and Richard related by blood, an unthinkable revelation. Horror churned in Sarah's stomach. She needed to speak to Richard immediately, for the sake of his unborn child, if nothing else. She dialed Richard's private line. No answer. She tried his office. He was in a board meeting and could not be disturbed. Sarah debated whether to contact him through Mark Henderson, but decided it was too sensitive for anyone else's ears. She tried to call Michael Harrington, hoping he might have a direct line to reach Richard privately. Michael picked up, concerned by the urgency in her tone. Sarah explained the basics, leaving out the more shocking parts until she could speak to Richard in person. Meanwhile, across town, Rebecca was preparing to celebrate the finalization of Richard's divorce at a private party. She had leased an upscale apartment on Fifth Avenue, using funds she coerced from Richard by citing pregnancy expenses. The space dripped with modern art and custom furniture, all curated to impress high society guests she planned to invite once she was Miss S. Davenport. She glanced at her reflection in a gilded mirror, hand resting on her belly, anticipating the life she believed she had won. A future where she'd command the Davenport fortune, raise a child with direct ties to one of the state's most distinguished families, and occupy a position Sarah once held. She smirked, savoring her triumph, but a knock on the door interrupted her reverie. A frazzled Michael Harrington stood in the hallway. In short, clipped phrases, he demanded to speak with her privately. He showed her the photo Sarah had messaged him, a screenshot of the paternity test that mentioned Leona Caldwell. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Rebecca's face went pale. She snatched the phone from him, eyes widening at the sight of the document. In that moment, her carefully constructed world teetered on the brink of collapse. Because if the test was true, and if she really was connected to Leona Caldwell, she and Richard might share a far more complicated bond than just lovers. Rebecca opened her mouth, but words failed. Fear thundered in her chest. All this time, she had believed she was orchestrating the perfect takeover of Richard Davenport's life. Now the possibility loomed that a dark family secret would not only destroy his life, but implicate her in a twisted narrative that even she could not have foreseen. And across the city, Sarah clutched the evidence, desperate to stop an unthinkable tragedy from unfolding. In one jaw-dropping moment, everything changed. The divorce that had been signed, the unborn children, the entire premise of betrayal None of it compared to the shocking discovery that Richard and Rebecca might be bound not just by romance, but by an unsettling family tie that could ruin them all. Richard sank into the leather chair at his office, sifting through the barrage of emails that had piled up. The tension behind his eyes throbbed like a warning beacon. He was officially a divorced man and a father to be twice over, yet the sense of relief he had expected never arrived. Instead, a deeper unease haunted him. A frantic knock on the door broke his thoughts. Michael Harrington rushed in without waiting for permission. His face was ashen, his demeanor uncharacteristically agitated. "I just came from Rebecca's place," he began, voice low. "We have a crisis on our hands. Sarah found a paternity test, one that links your father, Harrison Davenport, to someone named Leona Caldwell." At the mention of Caldwell, Richard felt his stomach clench. Caldwell was Rebecca's last name. "That can't be right," he muttered, already sensing where the conversation was headed. Michael hesitated before continuing. "Sarah thinks it implies that your real mother might have been Leona Caldwell and not Eva." Richard shot to his feet, nearly toppling the chair behind him. "That's impossible. My mother was Eva Davenport. She died in a car crash." His voice faltered, memory colliding with confusion. "My father would never have lied about something so enormous." Michael swallowed hard. "We don't know the full story, but if this test is legit, you and Rebecca could be half-siblings." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Richard's mind reeled. 1,000 recollections swirling the secrecy, the stony silence about his mother's death, the complicated and often distant relationship with Harrison. Could it all have been a cover for an affair that produced him? If so, then Eva might have raised him as her own, or perhaps there had been some arrangement. "We need to confirm this," Richard said hoarsely, grabbing his coat and phone. Michael followed him out the door, weaving through the stunned employees who gawked at the abrupt exit of the company's CEO. Within an hour, Richard and Michael stood at the genealogical and DNA testing unit of a private medical lab, typically used by the affluent to settle discrete matters of paternity. Richard gave a rush sample, consenting to an expedited test that compared his DNA to the old records stored by the Davenport estate. Meanwhile, Michael made calls to secure any records about Leona Caldwell, but hit repeated dead ends. As they waited for results, dread hollowed out Richard's chest. He thought about Sarah, pregnant with his child, now free from their marriage contract, but on the cusp of an even more horrifying revelation if the DNA test came back positive. What if he had unwittingly committed incest? The very idea threatened to unhinge him. Michael glanced at Richard's white-knuckled grip on the chair's armrest. "We don't know anything for certain yet," Michael offered, trying to steady him. "It could be a hoax. The Caldwell name might be a coincidence, or the document might have been faked." But neither man sounded convinced. Outside, a steady snow fell, obscuring the usually bustling cityscape. After 2 agonizing hours, a lab technician emerged with a sealed envelope. Richard's pulse hammered in his ears as he tore it open. The test concluded that there was a 99.7% chance that his biological mother was indeed Leona Caldwell, not Eva Davenport. He felt sick, his world tilting on its axis. Eva, the woman he'd called Mum his entire life, had somehow been a stepmother, or perhaps an adoptive mother, complicit in concealing the truth. "What about Rebecca?" Richard whispered, staring at the technician. "Could you compare her DNA to mine?" Michael jumped in. "We don't have a sample from her yet. She'd have to consent." Richard's expression darkened. He knew that if Rebecca really was related to him, the consequences were unimaginable both morally and legally. "We have to get a sample," he decided, voice raw. One way or another. Meanwhile, in her opulent apartment, Rebecca paced, phone in hand. She had never experienced such fear. She recalled childhood moments with her mother, Diane Caldwell, allegedly Leona's sister, who had died years ago. There had been hushed arguments, references to wealthy men who had abandoned them. Did that man end up fathering some distant relative in the Davenport clan? She pieced together scraps of overheard family gossip. At times she remembered hearing the name Harrison Davenport, but her mother had never elaborated. Panic consumed her. If Richard was indeed her half-brother, the child she carried was the product of a taboo relationship. The thought made her stomach twist with horror, repulsion, and an odd wave of despair. All her dreams of wielding the Davenport fortune vanished in a haze of moral revulsion. Was she so focused on ambition that she missed the possibility that her mother's lineage connected to his? She pressed a hand to her abdomen, tears welling up for the first time in years. Her phone buzzed Richard. She let it ring until it went to voicemail. Several messages followed, each sounding more desperate. Eventually she answered, voice shaky. "Rebecca," he said, exhaling in what sounded like relief. "We have to meet. Now. I need a DNA sample from you." She winced. I already know. Sarah's friend Michael showed me the test." "You think we're—" She couldn't say the word. "What are we supposed to do?" Richard's voice held no warmth. "We confirm. That's all we can do." They arranged to meet at the same private lab an hour later. Rebecca arrived, bundled in a long coat, hair pulled back in a tight bun, face devoid of makeup, and eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The stares they received from the staff, who recognized them from earlier visits, were impossible to ignore. In the sterile testing room, Rebecca extended her arm for a blood draw, hands trembling. She made no quips, no attempt at seduction. For once, she seemed terrified, a woman whose life was about to change irreparably. Richard stood at a distance, arms crossed, refusing to meet her gaze. When the nurse left them alone, Rebecca tried to speak. Richard, the first, he cut her off, voice quivering with anger and disgust. "How long have you known? Did you suspect anything when you realized our last names were connected? Did you come after me because you knew this secret, or were you just as clueless?" Her eyes flared. "I didn't know, I swear. You think I wanted this?" She gestured helplessly. "Everything I did, all the manipulation, the pushing, yes, it was to secure a future. But if I'd known we were related..." She trailed off, tears slipping down her cheeks. They fell silent, both consumed by an indescribable sense of betrayal of themselves, of the child she carried, of a truth hidden by Harrison Davenport and possibly by Leona Caldwell. Soon after, they left separately, awaiting another set of DNA results that would either doom them both or offer a slim chance of relief. Over the next 24 hours, Sarah discovered from Michael that Richard and Rebecca had gone for genetic testing. Fearing the worst, she found herself weeping in the quiet corners of the estate. She prayed for the sake of the unborn children, hers and Rebecca's, that some cosmic error had been made, that the documents were forgeries, or that the Caldwell name was a red herring. But fate often deals cruel hands. The test results arrived by secure email to both Richard and Rebecca. The words glared at them from the computer screen. "Based on the DNA samples submitted, there is a strong probability, 99.4%, that Richard Davenport and Rebecca Caldwell share a half-sibling relationship. Further analysis confirms that the unborn child of Miss Caldwell is at risk for congenital complications." Richard choked on a sob, smashing his fist against the desk. Rebecca slid to the floor in shock, clutching her belly, tears rolling down her cheeks. This was beyond any moral failing. They were linked by blood, their unborn child entangled in a horrifying twist of fate. News traveled swiftly to Sarah, who dropped the phone when Michael told her. Her mind reeled, the child inside her fluttering with movements that seemed to echo her distress. Was this baby also part of a labyrinthine family lie? Technically, it was free of the incestuous link, But the father was not who she believed him to be, a man with an equally hidden identity. In the face of such devastation, the once lavish lives of the Davenport circle seemed to crumble. Rebecca, who had fought tooth and nail to secure her place, was left with a pregnancy that symbolized taboo. Richard, who had sought solace in an affair, now stood on the precipice of a nightmare he could never have predicted. And Sarah, who wanted only to build a family in love, found herself entangled in the most grotesque betrayal of all, a marriage riddled with secrets and overshadowed by an unspeakable lineage. Yet, even in this darkest hour, a glimmer of possibility remained. Could they find a way forward that didn't doom the children, that didn't seal them in a legacy of shame? The final step would demand an extraordinary reckoning, one that required them to confront the truth in public, shattering the Davenport name if necessary. But it also might be the only path to redemption and the only hope for innocence amidst a swirl of scandal and heartbreak. The days that followed tested every emotional boundary. Newspapers and online gossip columns exploded with rumors about the Davenport divorce, sensationalizing Richard's affair. They reported it as a typical betrayal by a wealthy heir, completely ignorant of the dark secret roiling beneath the surface. Within the silent corridors of Davenport Manor, Richard convened with Sarah and Michael to decide the best course of action. Outside, a crisp winter sun illuminated a landscape that seemed at odds with the bleakness inside. Rebecca had secluded herself in her apartment, refusing contact except to confirm doctor's appointments. Sarah, pale and trembling, addressed the tension first. If we don't reveal the truth, people will continue to spread half-baked lies. But if we do, she paused, eyes filling with tears. The children, what will their lives be like? Richard stared at his feet. My entire life was based on a lie. My father was unfaithful, and I'm the product of that union. Eva must have known, or maybe she found out later, but either way, they covered it up. I can't pretend any of this is normal. Michael cleared his throat. There's a bigger issue here. Rebecca's child, your half-sibling's child, if she goes full term. He didn't finish the sentence. Incest carried profound medical risks. The tragic reality weighed on them like a physical burden. Sarah inhaled shakily. Have you talked to Rebecca about what she plans to do? Richard's jaw tightened. He recalled the anguished phone conversation from the night before. Rebecca had wailed, her voice filled with an odd mix of remorse and desperation. She was terrified for the baby's future. The doctors had already warned her about potential complications. Yet she couldn't bring herself to terminate the pregnancy without being absolutely certain. The moral, emotional, and spiritual turmoil threatened to unhinge her. I spoke to her, he said quietly. She's devastated, but she's also considering options. He hesitated to utter the word abortion, aware of how charged it was. She wants to see a specialist before deciding. Sarah placed a hand over her own abdomen protectively, tears threatening to spill once more. In that moment, she couldn't help feeling a flicker of pity for Rebecca. They were both pregnant. But, while Sarah's child was free from that incestuous tie, Rebecca's was trapped in a situation no innocent life should endure. That same evening, Richard made a statement to the press. Carefully worded and devoid of scandalous detail, he confirmed that he and Sarah had amicably divorced, citing irreconcilable differences. He mentioned nothing of Rebecca, nor the child. The public devoured the news, with many praising the couple's discretion. But behind this veneer of grace lay a labyrinth of darkness. A week later, a small envelope arrived at Davenport Manor, addressed to Richard. Inside was a letter from a law firm representing Rebecca. In it, Rebecca expressed her intent to disassociate from him entirely. She declined financial assistance and indicated she was moving to Europe for specialized prenatal care. She neither confirmed nor denied whether she planned to continue the pregnancy. The letter ended with a single line, penned in her own handwriting, "I'm sorry for everything." Richard reread the words. Part of him felt relief, perhaps distance was best for them all. Another part felt anguish he had once believed. He loved her, only to discover a monstrous truth neither of them had suspected. The guilt of having fathered a child with his half-sister, even unknowingly, was a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. In the ensuing months, Sarah remained at Davenport Manor, preparing for her own child. She kept in contact with Richard, who visited her often, though their relationship had transformed into something fragile and cautious. As her belly swelled, he found himself drawn into a silent vow to do right by his child in the way his father had failed. No massive news report ever publicized the incest revelation. The Caldwell name, overshadowed by hush money and discreet legal maneuvers, faded from public interest. Behind the scenes, Mark Henderson quietly stepped away from representing Rebecca. Perhaps even he had moral limits. Davenport real estate stabilized, though rumors persisted about Richard's private life. On a warm spring morning, Sarah went into labor. Richard rushed to be by her side at the hospital, his heart hammering like a drum. The birth was not without complications, but after several tense hours, a healthy baby boy emerged into the world. Sarah named him William, honoring Richard's grandfather Stuart William Davenport, yet forging a new path for the next generation. Richard held his tiny son, tears streaming down his face, silently pledging to be the father he never had. As days turned to weeks, Richard moved back into a modest wing of Davenport Manor. He and Sarah co-parented baby William, forging a friendship that surpassed the bitterness of their divorce. She had no illusions that they would simply rekindle their marriage. Too much water had passed under that bridge. But they found a measure of peace in focusing on their son's future. One afternoon, as Sarah rocked William to sleep, Richard timidly sat beside her. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Rebecca, she left me a voicemail yesterday. She's in Switzerland, undergoing some treatments. She kept the baby." Sarah's eyes flickered with emotion. "How is she?" Richard's gaze was distant. She didn't say much, just that the doctors are monitoring the baby's development. He paused, struggling with a wave of despair. "I can't even imagine what she's going through." The silence between them was saturated with a shared sorrow, a recognition that this saga had no easy resolution. Sarah gently placed William in his crib, turning to Richard. "Maybe you can offer her some support, at least financially, despite everything." She trailed off, recalling the cruelty Rebecca had shown her, yet unable to ignore the gravity of the situation. Richard sighed. "She refused my help in writing, but I'll set up a fund in case the child needs specialized care. Whether she likes it or not, it's my responsibility too." Months slipped by. Summer came, and with it, a hush settled over the scandal. William grew, bringing untold joy to Sarah and Richard. Yet every so often, Richard woke in a cold sweat, haunted by nightmares of a child he might never meet, one burdened by a taboo lineage. Finally, in early autumn, an envelope postmarked from Geneva arrived. Inside was a single photograph, Rebecca cradling a newborn girl, a swirl of medical equipment behind her. No note, no name, just a snapshot that conveyed exhaustion, fear, and a fierce maternal protectiveness. The baby had tubes in her nose, and the fourth in her tiny arm. A chill of dread washed over Richard. The child had survived, but at what cost? The next day, a second envelope arrived at Davenport Manor, this time addressed to Sarah. It contained a short letter in Rebecca's cursive. "Sarah, you probably think I deserve punishment for what I did to your marriage. Maybe you're right. But please understand, this was never my plan. I didn't know. Now, my daughter, her name is Dawn, is struggling. The doctors say she might face lifelong challenges. I'm writing to say I'm sorry, truly, and to beg you, if anything happens to me, don't let Dawn be alone in this world. I know Richard will help, but he will need your strength too. I can't blame you if you tear this letter apart. I just hope you won't." Rebecca Sarah's vision blurred with tears. Dawn. Even the name evoked new beginnings, a poignant irony given the circumstances. She showed Richard the letter that evening, after he returned from a long day at the office. He collapsed into a chair, pressing his palms against his forehead. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "We can't undo what's happened. But that little girl is still my child, and she's innocent in all of this." Sarah crouched beside him, placing a steadying hand on his arm. "We help however we can." "It's all we can do," she said quietly. And in that moment, an unlikely camaraderie formed between them, a shared sense of responsibility, not just for William, but for Dawn, who bore the heaviest burden of the Davenport saga. Some tragedies remain forever etched in the human heart, too painful to erase, too complex to fully rationalize. Yet from those tragedies emerge possibilities for growth, compassion, and an understanding that sometimes we must stand together in the face of brokenness. For Richard, Sarah, and Rebecca, the final chapter in their entangled story had yet to be written. But one truth stood clear: the path forward demanded they confront the haunting legacy of their choices and the fragile, precious lives they had brought into the world. The stunning revelations, lost dreams, and fragile hopes of Richard, Sarah, and Rebecca show us how quickly life can twist down a path we never imagined. No matter how grand the estate or how vast the inheritance, no one is immune to heartbreak and the secrets that unravel even the most carefully built foundations. Yet in the end, it was their capacity to face the ugly truth and to protect the innocent children caught in the storm that hinted at the possibility of redemption. We have just witnessed a journey of scandal, betrayal, and hidden family ties that shattered 3 lives. But from the ashes of one broken story might rise the promise of compassion and renewed purpose. If this winding tale struck your heart, please share your thoughts below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us how fragile our world can be and how vital our humanity truly is.